What could President Trump and Elon Musk do to student loans? Do student loan borrowers need to be really worried that maybe the Department of Education will be totally toast, and all of the new regulations that President Biden did with IDR and PSLF, and everything's just going to go away and everybody's just going to be sort of up the creek without a paddle? Well, I'm going to go in this video and explain in detail why I think you probably need to worry a little bit less. And I'm going to show you what they can do with student loans, which is there's definitely some big shocking things that they could do. And then I'm going to show you a much more important list of things they cannot do on student loans so that you don't need to worry as much. So let's take a look. So let's talk about what things that President Trump could do on student loans if they wanted to. They can absolutely eliminate the SAVE plan. So saving on valuable education, this is a plan that was created by the Biden administration through something called negotiated rulemaking. So that's when they get a group together, they decide what they want to do with new income-driven repayment regulations. They have to publish it in the Federal Register by November of the prior year to have it taken into effect July of the following calendar year. So that would mean if they wanted to eliminate SAVE and replace it with something else, you'd have to get a group together, you'd have to publish a rule, have public comment period, have to publish it in the official register by November of 2025 or 2026 for it to take into effect July of the following calendar year. Now, they could easily try to block enrollment of the SAVE plan. They can maybe wait for a court to decide this for them, but they could absolutely get rid of the SAVE plan. That would be very easy for them to do that. Now, they can also change Biden-era IDR and PSLF rules. Now, not income-based repayment and PSLF themselves. What I mean is the rules that apply to those programs that are sort of subject to interpretation. So, for example, for income-driven repayment, they could make it a lot more difficult to go into forbearance, for example. They can make it more difficult to not just disclose all of your income in full when you're recertifying, for example. They could limit things like alternative documentation of income. They could make PSLF revert back to the definition it was before, where you had to say, well, what is your employer's definition of full-time? That's what would have to be used potentially if they revert some of these new rules back to the old rules. They could also, if they wanted to, curtail some of those rules that allowed physicians in Texas and California to get access to PSLF and they previously were not able to, right? So there's a lot of power that Department of Education would have through, the White House directing them to make access to income-driven repayment and PSLF more difficult. Now, there's a lot of things that are defined for those programs. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, number 3 here, what they could do, they could audit and review the Department of Education. So there are absolutely a lot of questionable practices that happen through Department of Ed that result in, the government losing money. An example would be, there's a sort of a strategy out there where, people are told, well, just max out your 401k 100% in one paycheck and then use a $0 paycheck to recertify your income. I mean, if you recall, there was also a GAO investigation that found that, there was a group in California that was telling people to put their family size was 93, and that would result in them having a $0 IDR payment, right? So a lot of these sort of more questionable practices could be evaluated by Department of Education, and, anything that popped up that they felt was abusive, they could crack down on really hard, right? Because it says when you certify your information for things like IDR, it says under penalty of perjury. So I could easily see a scenario where there are some student loan borrowers that get told, hey, you did not follow the rules about certifying your income, or you hid things, and they could try to make an example out of whatever the most egregious cases of the situation would be. Now, keep in mind, even in that example that I used of the person who said that they had a family size of 93, the group that got in trouble was the company that was telling people to do that. It wasn't the person themselves, I don't believe, that got in deep trouble. So I think that that's something that you don't have to worry about, this. You just have to be aware that could happen. They could audit, review Department of Ed. And the other big thing they could do is they could limit staff hiring. They could slow down processing, right? They could make forms go a lot more slowly. They could make PSLF approvals go a lot more slowly. Maybe because they just want to review and make sure that the credit is actually there. You could maybe say that there's very fast approval under the Biden administration compared to prior administrations of things like PSLF. So maybe, they would want to review things more slowly. Somebody that would be more opposed to the administration might say, well, maybe that's part of their plan to slow walk, certain kinds of programs, right? Now, but they could do things like hiring freezes. There's things that they could try to do to really reduce the available manpower that'd be available to process things like PSLF applications for people. Now, I want to talk about things they cannot do so that you can know that there are a lot of limitations on what President Trump and Doge and all the different associated groups can recommend or do on student loans. So the first thing is you cannot move student loans out of Department of Education. So the Higher Education Act governs student loans. The Ford Direct Loan Program is specifically listed that the Secretary of Education has to offer this program, right? So it specifically says it in the statute. IDR and IBR also specifically mention the Secretary of Education is supposed to govern those programs. So that's something that they cannot do. So they can maybe send a lot of civil rights kind of stuff out of Department of Ed. Maybe they can take certain types of curriculum programs out of Department of Ed, right? But there's some things in the statute that they literally cannot do without Congress. Now, they might try to put a hold on it. They might try to put a freeze. They might try to do administrative or leave. They might try to offer buyouts to people, right? But ultimately, if they do something, if a court finds it objectionable according to the statute, and remember, it could be like an appeals court that's a little bit more progressive, for example. All it takes is for an injunction, and then you have this long, drawn-out legal process. So it's pretty clear to me that they're not wanting to get bogged down in a bunch of legal fights. They want to keep moving, right? So you're not going to be able to move student loans out of Department of Ed without Congress. Another one, number 2, is you cannot cap borrowing without Congress. So you have a desire from Republicans to cap borrowing by eliminating the Grad Plus loan program, which allows for unlimited borrowing for grad school, and also Parent Plus loans are unlimited borrowing for undergrad. So there's a strong desire to cap those programs among Republicans. They might be able to achieve that through the reconciliation bill, which would avoid the 60-vote threshold needed in the Senate. But if that were to happen, you would have to, you would have to do that through the legislative process. So President Trump and Doge cannot do student loan caps themselves. That's not something that they're able to do. Only Congress can do that. So Congress might choose to do that. They might do that, but they cannot do it themselves alone. Trump administration cannot eliminate PSLF, not without consent of Congress. So Congress passed the law. Congress has to be the one to repeal the statute or change the statute to get rid of PSLF. So it's in the statute. Now you might say again, well, they can slow walk it. They can choose not to process the forgiveness forms. There's a lot of things they could do. But keep in mind, I didn't actually see anybody not get PSLF that qualified for it in the first Trump administration. It wasn't a lot of people, but remember that the program was designed in a dysfunctional way. FFEL loans were the only kinds of loans that were issued until 2010, really, in large volume at least. And so pretty much everybody had the wrong kind of loans. Nobody knew to consolidate the loans. But people that did follow the letter of the law did get their loans forgiven via PSLF. And why did that happen? Well, it was in the statute, right? And what Biden did is he took all of those FFEL loan payments that were made, and many payments were not even made under income-based plans, and he said, well, if you consolidate your loans, we're just going to credit you on all those past payments as if it had been income-driven payment and if it had been direct loans. Well, the Democratic Congress that originally worked with President Bush to pass the first PSLF rule, they passed it the way they did intentionally so that the CBO 10-year cost would be low and so that it would pass and wouldn't get flagged as being expensive by the CBO nonpartisan scorekeeper, right? So that's maybe more explanation than you needed, but PSLF's locked in. The only question is this expansive definition of PSLF going to be what's used, or is the more limited, restrictive definition of PSLF in the statute going to be used? And the statute still includes a whole lot of positive things in terms of people getting PSLF. So just keep that in mind, right? But you might see them try to come up with creative types of paths, like trying to get nonprofit hospitals, for example, to not be nonprofits. I mean, that's something big like that would probably still have to happen through legislation. And, they might try, but they can't just get rid of PSLF if you're working at the VA, if you're working in government, if you're working in one of these, very obviously not-for-profit sectors. You're very, very safe. And I would say if you work at a nonprofit hospital, you're just very safe. Right, it's all about probabilities, extremely low probability they can do anything, even if they limit those expansive regulations on PSLF that Biden did to really impact that much. Income-based repayment, IBR, this is another one that's defined in the statute. Now, the cousin of IBR is ICR. ICR is a separate statute. That's the one that Democrats have used in the past to say, well, the statute says no more than 20% of income, no more than 25 years until repayment. So that's the statute that they've used to create the repay plan, the pay plan, the save plan, to try to allow people to pay a lot less money on their student loans. Meanwhile, the IBR plan is defined explicitly as 15% of income if you borrowed before July 2014 for 25 years, and then 10% of income for 20 years if you borrowed after July 2014 for the first time. And of course, if you're PSLF, then it's 10 years. So IBR cannot be messed with. If you want to, you could rein in some of the new regulations around IBR that President Biden did, but IBR itself cannot be messed with. So if you have any comments or questions about what your things that you think that President Trump or Elon's going to do with student loans, put them in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. And also, if you like videos like this, subscribe to Student Loan Planner, and thank you for following our stuff. We're going to have to see what happens, but just keep in mind, everybody needs to be patient right now. It's bad to rush into decision making. The first 100 days of a new administration are always full of chaos, full of confusion, full of policy changes. Student loan borrowers need to just buckle in for a long ride. And I think, if you really think about your student loan plan, it doesn't need to change drastically just because of some of these changes, and a lot of it's going to be a lot more headline risk than anything. So put your comments in below what you think is going to happen with student loans. We'd love to see what you think.